Perhaps there were time constraints, or maybe everyone was confident it would work right from the start. Ippei Kuri remembers,
There was no pilot film made. We presented various drawn pictures and scenes to help introduce the characters.
Clearly, these were enough to sell the show to the sponsors and get it going. But this move was especially odd considering the importance that Tatsuo placed on the project. Sadao Miyamoto took on the task of animating the footage that would be used in the opening credits. He wanted to make certain the show started off with the correct, realistic look Tatsuo Yoshida wanted. Chief Director Hisayuki Toriumi recalls,
Miyamoto joined Tatsunoko around the time of decision. He came over to instruct the young animators in the office. The power and the work from the crew at Tatsunoko was largely thanks to Miyamoto.
Miyamoto's animation also acted as a guide to other animators on the show, and the look they were to strive to duplicate. Perfecting the Tatsunoko style proved to be a tough learning curve. Miyamoto gives the credit to the creator, though.
Tatsuo Yoshida was responsible for all the original character designs and all the original drawings. I did my best to adapt his extremely detailed, very shadowy, realistic drawings. But in order to make these acceptable, or easier to animate, easier to make move, I was responsible for cleaning up the images, tightening up the lines. But other than that, I tried to retain as much of the original images as possible. What made Gatchaman a trend-setting animation compared to other shows in the 1970s, things like Devilman and so forth, was its realism. We worked very hard to make it a realistic show. We wanted the audience to feel as if they were taking part in what was going on in the screen. We wanted you to feel like you were right there. And that's what I consider to be the most distinctive feature of the series.
The visual appearance was extremely important for Gatchaman to be successful. It was a favored production within the studio, and nearly any expense that could be spared to make the show look better was allowed. This included more production time, larger budgets, a larger staff, and a dramatic increase in the actual amount of animation that was done for the show. Ippei Kuri has stated that the animation cell count of the average Gatchaman episode ranged between 4,500 and 6,000. This was a substantial increase from the normal amount used to produce a half-hour program, which generally ranged from the mid to high 3,000s area. Sadao Miyamoto provides more detail.
Basically, the corporate side of Tatsunoko was responsible for assigning the budget to the production side, as in how many cells would be allowed per episode. The average was about 5,000 or so in Gatchaman's case. Yoshida wanted it to be good, so he assigned a decent budget to it, and he approved things like, okay, you can run 7,000 cells per episode in this particular one. We did have time constraints, however, so this was not always the case.
Effects were also a big part of the program. Various eye-grabbing effects from airbrushed cells to live-action plates to experimental lighting and photography techniques were refined in earlier Tatsunoko works, but used here to give Gatchaman its own identity. Sadao Miyamoto recalls,
A lot of the smoke effects, the highlights on the machines, and the effects on the visors were all done by airbrush. Something else was the realism of the explosions. In other animation productions, you would see a spiky little plume coming out from the center. I wanted something more realistic and more involving, like a real explosion. Realism was something we focused on for Gatchaman.
the production of Gatchaman was intense, rushed, and seemingly never-ending. Hisayuki Toriumi reflects,
I looked over everything. Others would work on individual stories, but I always oversaw them. As many as 3 scripts would be going on at one time, and they were always shown to other directors to make sure it would all fit together with what was already established. At times, I'd take over and say how I wanted to see something done. To start each episode, the director would work closely with me to establish what the episode would be about. Then we'd have the storyboards done.
the time to produce a single episode took about 3 months, and the production overlapped several stories and episodes at any given time. So the staff was constantly busy for the entire time Gatchaman was on the air. Even though so much was put into the start of the series and the realism of its characters, Gatchaman's early episodes had a completely different look than it did at the end. This was partially due to the natural time it took the artists to get used to drawing the characters, but also because a stable of top-notch animators like Masami Suda and Tsuneo Ninomiya or given more opportunity to show what they could do. Both had been at the studio for a long time, but were only coming into their own at the time Gatchaman began production. A friendly rivalry developed between the two to see who could produce the most interesting and realistic scenes, which only benefited Gatchaman. Sadao Miyamoto recalls,
It was difficult for a lot of the animators to work with the degree of realism this show required. However, they were motivated and very enthusiastic about it. I had a lot of high-level animators on my staff, and many of them had gone on to become very famous. A lot of it was due to their own motivation. They were very willing to put out what it took to get this thing put together.
By about a third of the way through the series, Gatchaman had picked up its characteristic look, which kept getting more and more detailed as the series progressed. Not only were the animators more comfortable drawing in a realistic style, the direction by Hisayuki Toriumi was becoming more confident and cinematic. He remembers,
I enjoyed Japanese films more than foreign ones, but there definitely were influential elements from things like 2001 and Planet of the Apes. There were all kinds of influences from old movies. Tatsuo encouraged all of us to see a lot of movies, and he went all the time to see what was new.
Tatsuo Yoshida was swamped with work early into the Gatchaman series, and he left a lot of the decisions up to Hisayuki Toriumi. As time went on, Tatsuo made fewer and fewer changes. Toriumi recalls,
After about episode 7 or 8, he would only do it if he had time. Someone would peek into his office and ask, "Want to see it?" Mostly he would correct facial expressions.
most of the higher-level staff were trusted to make the right decisions regarding the show and were left alone. Even though Gatchaman was his pride, Tatsuo ran a studio where anyone could make creative suggestions. Ippei Kuri points out,
I got to have a say in things and make characters too. Everyone was trusted and the general air was very good. It really was a first-class place.
Miyamoto agrees.
Yoshida had a major hand in inspiring the staff to set up things. He was very good at inspiring to create this project.
When Gatchaman started, there were no plans made for its end. It was simply going to stop when the sponsors, studio, and/or lack of audience decided it would. When the end of the first year approached, Tatsunoko Productions, Fuji Television, their partners, and Gatchaman fans were all looking for more. So it was decided to continue production for a time. Miyamoto recalls,
There was no real planning on when things were going to start or when they were going to end. I started off working on Gatchaman as a freelancer. I figured as soon as it looked like the series was going to end that I was going somewhere else. But they got me and said, "Come here, you're not going anywhere." We were doing this for 2 years. So I was with it for 2 years. There wasn't really any long-term planning as to how long it would last.
by the latter half of the series, the flat, cartoonish characters that had begun the run were gone, replaced by versions that had real depth and emotion to their appearances. Hisayuki Toriumi once said,
Tatsunoko's characters depended on the delicate nuances of their faces.
the detail in the line work and facial expressions was amazing to watch, and something that directly led to the popularity of Gatchaman. The writing and the characters were also given the amount of time they needed to develop and present more interesting facts and details. Early unconnected storylines yielded to more intricate and intertwined stories that spanned large amounts of time. The length of the program allowed for many different angles to be explored, left alone, and brought back to explore or resolve again months later. For instance, it is revealed that Ken's father was missing early into the run of Gatchaman. Then, hints and teases were revealed every once in a while, until the plotline was finally settled in episodes 52 and 53. Joe mentioned that his parents were killed by Galactor agents in episode 18, and this plot was dealt with again several times until its climactic event finally took place in episode 81. While Gatchaman tended to focus on Ken and his life for the first half of the run, Joe's backstory dominated the second half. Ippei Kuri remembers,
Ken was the one we considered to be the hero. He was probably less attractive, though, as he was felt to be a little too serious. But as an outlaw and a nihilist, Joe had a cool charm and was favored over the hero. Even though Ken is the perpetual hero, he didn't have that certain something. The drama turned to Joe, and people connected with him very well. It might have been that Joe's personality became more appealing unconsciously.
The reaction to Gatchaman at the time in Japan was completely favorable. Children loved the show in the beginning, but it pulled in older viewers toward the end. The realistic style of animation and the decidedly unchildlike plots of the later stories were more than enough to capture the interest of adolescents. Being able to capture more than its intended audience was a major achievement for Tatsunoko, and one that won them even more praise and a tighter bond with their broadcast partner, Fuji Television. The final episode of Gatchaman aired on September 29, 1974, marking a stunning 105 original half-hour episodes. With a new episode every week, Gatchaman had been able to deliver and perform as Tatsuo had hoped. It would come to be a memorable show, a classic in Japanese animation which still routinely makes the list of top animated programs in the country. To this day, Gatchaman is a well-respected and remembered program, and it continues to generate public interest and reverence for Tatsunoko Productions. Even before it completed airing, Tatsunoko was already considering selling Gatchaman internationally. In March 1975, they attended the MIP, Marche Internationale du Programme, conference in Cannes, France, where they presented their work to that point for sale to any interested television producers around the world. It is generally remembered that Gatchaman was available for licensing in 1975. Whether anyone from America looked at it at that point is unknown, but certainly it was never purchased. The same holds true for the 1976 and 1977 MIP conferences, where Gatchaman went unsold again. However, Gatchaman was seen in 1977 by an American television executive. He didn't take any action at the time, but when the unforeseen and unprecedented reaction to the May theatrical release of Star Wars hit the industry, he remembered the exciting, heroic Japanese show that Tatsunoko Productions had offered. A generation of American youngsters were about to witness a revolution.